who's here. So thanks for joining the GTM Drop-In on how to run first meetings. I'm Charles. I'm one of the co-founders of Closing Foundry. For those who don't know what we do, we work with early stage companies to reduce cycle time, improve win rates, and forecast accuracy to help them close the gap between their targets, their forecasts, and actuals. Typically, most revenue misses are created upstream and seen too late. So today, where you have poor first meetings, and that causes problems later on in the cycle, directly impacting cycle time, forecast accuracy. We've got 45 minutes. Generally, in these sessions, we go over a little bit. So we can do that today. It is a quote unquote working session. So if possible, please turn your camera on so we can see who's there and active. If you've got a question, use the chat. I won't be able to see it. Laurie will need to stop me talking. Raise your hand, dive in, just say something. It doesn't matter if you interrupt or whatever. Please get involved if but don't feel obliged to. On the call, we've got Douglas. Douglas is a GTM turnaround expert. Started life in value engineering, from what I understand, and has led teams. Some of the big boys, so Oracle, more recently Okta, selling the mega deals, but has also worked with both startups and scale-ups. So got the full gamut. We've got Laurie's on the call. So Laurie is multi-talented. So Laurie is literally, I suppose, worked in startups where there's zero revenue and taken through to the scale-up phase. I think at peak it's about 50 million ARR, which is not shoddy. Also worked in enterprises like or large organizations like Oracle, and is also an investor. So can speak from that side of the fence, so to speak. We've got Gavin on the call, and Gavin is the CEO of a company called Accelerate 360, a sales outsourcing company that lines these first meetings up, so does the hard work, but has got A's that run full sales cycle. So actually, executes the type of call that we're talking about today. You don't need to write any notes. Well, share all the insights. You'll get the meeting recording, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so yeah, that's probably the setup. I think Douglas, do you want to just take it from here for a sec?
Yeah, I just want to set the scene a little bit. So one of the reasons we chose this topic for today, we work with a lot of startups and scale ups, and I would say 60-70% of the time, if they've already got a sales process in flight, or a sales motion in flight, they say, well, we need help closing. My salespeople can't close, or I can't close. We have great conversations, a lot of interest in our product. We go through the sales cycle, but we can't close. And invariably, when we do a post-mortem and look at it, the problem is not the actual closing. The problem starts very early in the cycle, and often it's the very first meeting. So we're not going to talk today about how to get the first meeting. We've talked about that in the past, and we can talk about that in the future, possibly, if there's interest in it. Getting that first C-level meeting or whatever. It's, setting the value anchor and the point of view in that first meeting and how that kicks off an echo chamber throughout the entire sales process. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll take questions as we go. Just put your hand up or put a question in the chat. And then if we have time at the end, we'll take further questions. So first, we're going to start with a little bit of a poll.
Okay, so to get us focused in the right place. So how many, I'm gonna ask a question. If you can just drop this into the chat. It could be multiple things that you recognize or have come across. But how many people have seen this? So you think you're onto a good thing, you've got some fairly decent access, you think you're having the right conversations, but you can't quite get the deal across the line, or it takes forever to get it across the line, right? So the options are, so we've got good access to the right people, but couldn't get it across the line, as I've said. we've had the right conversations, but the deal took forever. They were interested, but we never really got momentum. We did the deal and the proposal and it's still later, or none of the above. And if anybody puts five into the chat, then A, that's incredible. But B, come and have a chat because we'd like to know your secret sauce. So yeah, just put that stuff into the chat.
You can't say all of the above, Isabella. That's a good shout, actually.
Yeah.
So we got some fours, a three, a two,
All of the above.
and all of the above.
It's everything.
Yeah.
We've all been there.
Yeah. So I think we've all experienced, I mean, all of these things, right? As I say, if you've had five, you shouldn't be in this room. Um, so 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 the problem here, as we've said, is that sales cycles are struggling. So are you doing the right things on the first meeting? So what we've seen, as Douglas mentioned, setting up the first meeting with the right preparation, having the right content, creates this echo chamber throughout the whole sales cycle. You create the relationship, you create credibility. It makes that deal more predictable and more forecastable. So, it means that that first meeting sets the tone, the direction, set the credibility for everything else that follows. If it's weak, the deal, may look active later, and we've all seen this, but it slows down, it's vague, you can't forecast it, it's impossible to forecast. So obviously that's what we're going to go through today. Thanks for sending in your questions. And there's some really, really good ones. Some of them are a bit too specific to go through on this call. We potentially need to have another chat about them because the devil's in the detail, right? But broadly, there were these kind of five areas that came up. So, how do you stop first meetings going quiet? Yeah. So how do you, create momentum after the first meeting? How do you tell the difference between something that's genuine interest versus just polite? So, is it real or not? Implicating the pain. So, how do you implicate the pain without interrogating? This is a med pick thing in terms of that sales qualification model. And it's a really, really good question. We'll answer that as we go through. How do you get access to the person that can move the deal? Okay. And yeah, how do you, if you've got a product that's category defining, highly differentiated, hard to understand, hard to place, then how do you handle that as within this first meeting? Alessandro, I can see you've got your hand up.
No, it was a question about how to frame it, and the setting the meeting is good, but actually taking it to the next stage, I think, was the area that I was curious about. I think you're going about it, so I kind of preempted you. I think I apologize. So
No, that's all good. So yes, how do you frame it? So we're literally going to give you three ways, three specific frames, or three things to frame. So yeah, so we'll answer that question for you
thank you.
directly. Yeah. Okay, so we'll answer these as we go through. We'll also spend some time at the end with the Q&A to clarify anything that isn't clear, but also, probably more importantly, get into the context of any specific situations that you've got. Okay. Okay, so we'll go through why first meetings matter, when they hurt, what the first meeting must achieve, and how to create momentum after that first meeting. Point to note that what we're going to talk about today is totally relevant for SMB, mid-market, and enterprise sales motions. What you need to do is essentially the same, but at different speeds and in a different depth. Okay. So these first meetings are pretty hard to get, right? So, I mean, Gavin will talk to this in a second, but it takes just under 45 kind of activities, whether it's LinkedIn, email, calls, whatever it is, to get some form of engagement. And then once you've got some form of engagement, it's specifically 6.3 things you need to do to get them over the line to get the meeting. So, that meeting is a tip of a lot of hard work that's gone to create that. So getting the right person into that meeting obviously takes a lot of effort. If it takes that much work to get the meeting, wasting it is expensive, right? So, that means that, you need to prepare, not just show up for that thing. So, Gavin, can you give us a bit of context on these numbers, maybe a bit of insight in terms of where they're trending?
Yeah, sure. So I think what's important here is this is based just on those customers that we do cold outreach for. So this is not, there are customers that we do inbound, but this is our outbound strategies. We measure, Charles will tell you, we measure absolutely everything in our business. Number of pickups, amount of time on phone, you name it. So we get a lot of insight into how these activities hang together in a cadence to get these first meetings. And our customers are spread across about 75–80% are in the technology and software SaaS space. The remainder in a varying different verticals. What does happen with these numbers is that you see sometimes the number of activities per engagement can reduce if there is a brand. I mean, we do a lot of work for Castrol, for example, because they have a brand. Actually, when you do connect with the right person, we see a reduction in the engagement side of this because that people will meet with them more regularly. So that's 6.3 might be down as low as 4. If you've got no brand, that may be up around 8. So there are variations to this, but it's a good rule of thumb that justifies the value of that first meeting and why being prepared for that is so important. It also is a testament to how much work goes up front in terms of preparing not just for the first meeting, but also for the way that your activity needs to inform that first meeting. So we use a lot of AI to do that. We'll talk in some slides in a little bit further on. We'll go into point of view and what that means. But we're developing that right at the very outset by using AI, looking for signals, looking for news, looking for things that will drive conversations in order to make that meeting happen. And I think that from the meeting itself is critical, but what's also critical is the process of getting there.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks, Gavin. So the dangerous meeting is the one that kind of feels good, but really doesn't create any evidence that the buyer is actually involved. So we've all had it where it feels good, but there are missing elements that create, I suppose, damage kind of later on. So no problems established, no consequence or magnitude of the problem. You haven't got a path to the right people. There's no reason to do anything now. So if you're at the last session, there are 3 things the buyer needs to do or needs to kind of get across in their head, so to speak. So why do they need to change? Why do they need to do something now? And why they do it with you? So if there's no reason to do anything now, that's a problem. And there's no agreed buyer action. Okay, so these are missing elements. So if that first meeting isn't good, it may look kind of active later, but it slows down, as I mentioned, becomes vague and hard to forecast. So what you're seeing is false momentum. Okay. It looks like progress in the CRM because you've done a demo, but the buyer really hasn't understood the value or taken a meaningful action. So really the sales cycle hasn't started unless the buyer's taken a meaningful action. Okay. Which could be as simple as you've had the meeting, you sent a follow-up, you put a point of view across, and they've corrected you on your point of view in that email, right? It's a small thing, but they've started to get involved. It could be they've brought someone else into the next meeting. That's a bigger thing, right? It could be that they've found out some information they didn't know on that first meeting to inform how much you can save them or how much you can make them. They're starting to become complicit in your in the sales motion by doing a little bit of work, right? I think what we know, these are really, really common signals of false momentum. So you're doing the demo, you're jumping to demo way before you started to unpick exactly what the problem is and how you can help them. So they see the product, but they don't see the value you can provide. You're getting right into pricing before you're starting to understand the value you can provide. So they're only seeing price and not offsetting it against value. Okay. They see the proposal, but it's not, exposed to all the relevant people that it needs to be exposed to. You're doing, your company pitch, but it's dressed up as discovery, so it's not discovery at all. Okay. So these are missing elements that really delay the sale kind of later on. Practically, I'll give you 4 examples, right? So US company, 10, 15, SMB, so 10, 15 K in terms of value. First call doing the full demo. Or way too much demo, getting the proposal out. And so the client or the prospect is seeing the proposal, they're seeing the price, and that's the focus. They've got no way of offsetting that against the value. And this was across like 3 or 4 kind of SMB sellers. They were all doing this, and they were wondering why things were not progressing. Okay. Someone else. So I won't say I won't name names, obviously, right? But looking at 16 deals, mid-stage deals, they all needed to be, either well, we got rid of quite a majority of them, but they all needed to be requalified. All of those first meetings needed to be done again. You started asking questions to the guys that are obviously running the processes, and as soon as you start to pick holes, you can see there's gaping holes, and you start to listen to the calls, and you can see exactly what the problem is. And it is these, whether it's the first meeting, could be the second meeting, but it's very early on in the cycle. We managed to save a couple, but broadly we had to get rid of everything. So if you imagine that 80% of your pipeline is false, as a function of what's going on, kind of early stage. Another company, they actually had, in the stage 1 of the sales process, share pricing, right? Shouldn't do that. Another one, their discovery was 20 slides of a presentation that just talks about them, their product, who their investors were, all that kind of stuff. So clearly that's all very bad practice. But this is over the past 12 months. So it still goes on, even though there's so much information out there about how to execute from a sales perspective. I suppose question, is there anything well for the operators on the call, is there anything I've missed here? Are there any kind of false signals that you've come across?
No, I think that's right. And I think, the challenge as, sales professionals is we look for positivity. Because if we didn't, you know, it's a pretty hard place to be because you have to handle a lot of rejection and a lot of negativity and things like that. Um, so I think one of the other things that can help to mitigate this, and I'm getting to another topic that we'll cover in a future drop-in, but is if you use a qualification methodology like MedPick, when your salespeople have happy ears, when your founder has happy ears, when you have happy ears, it helps you to sanity check it.
Yeah. So I think, cognitive bias says that, we all think the thing sounds good, but, erring on the side of caution, being more about risk and picking holes is probably the better mindset to have.
Charles, there's
Um,
something else there as well that I picked up on. I noticed a lot of people came up in the first poll with answer 4, which is that gone dark after the demo and price. And I think, that goes so hand in hand with that pricing before value. And I think it's worth calling out here. Yes, you did hear that correctly, Tim. Happy ears, big happy ears. Everything's a yes. Partly look for the no. Look for the no is what I always say to sales guys. But I think in terms of some of you here, where you're category creators and you're launching a product which maybe is not competing in a recognized space, it's not a new mousetrap. Sometimes the temptation is moving into that demo really fast because you're almost trying to explain to people what it is that you're actually talking about. Now, what I'd urge you to remember is when, Word has got 10,000 functions in it, probably. We probably collectively use 100 of them regularly. And we probably, as individuals, will buy that on 3 or 4 of them, like cut and paste is my favorite tool in Word or whatever it looks like. And I think you've got to remember that actually, when you've got all that functionality in your product, you've really got to focus on what is important to that individual in terms of what you're doing. And that was an analogy that was given to me a while back, and I thought it might be relevant here.
Yeah, 100%. So I mean, my takeout from this is just to be paranoid about any first meeting that you've had, any deal that you've had. Look for the negatives versus the positives. Okay, so the sense here is that we need to change things if people are, taking those bad practices. But so take time to actually speed up your sales cycle. So the goal, is not to slow, deals down. The goal is to stop this false progression by rushing through your sales process. So don't rush through your sales process. Nurture, your prospect through their buying process. So Laurie, you've got your hand up.
No, there's just something interesting come up in the chat, which says from Henry, should the first meeting ever be framed as understanding the buyer instead of explaining our product?
Yeah, I mean that's really the sentiment of this whole piece. If you talk about the balance of you, the seller, communicating what you want to communicate and understanding what the buyer's problem is and the magnitude of the problem, the switch is to focus on them and their world versus you and your world. Clearly it's a balance, but yeah, buyer centricity is
I,
uh,
I,
key.
I'll just jump in on that. I think there's also another point that when sort of doing that discovery work, sometimes it can be, I have people selling to me and it can be very grating. People just dive into questions. So there's kind of an element of earning the right to ask those questions and do discovery as well.
Yeah, and that
Completely agree with that. Completely agree with that. And I think framing it as explain like understanding the buyer is that I've found that actually becomes a barrier to because I've heard some of this content before from Charles and various other people. Um, that framing of understanding the buyer is I 100% I want to do it. I'm pushing that as a like an agenda that is on my agenda.
yeah.
But is it really is it what they want to be spending their time doing? They actually just want to learn about what you do and the potential features. So it is like how do we frame that as being highly valuable to the customer?
And
Just wait
sorry,
till
briefly, there's another question, Charles, but I think you might cover it in a moment. So I'm going to leave those for a second. If you don't, I'm going to come back to them from Shamaz and Alessandro.
Yeah, okay. All right, let's make sure we get to those. But yeah, to your point, Tim. I mean, this is a dance, right? So we're going to give you some direction for that dance. And yes, you want to understand about the buyer 100%. And yeah, we'll give you a conduit to doing that. And this is really, really important. So don't rush to demo, don't rush to pricing, don't rush to proposal. Don't just move things in your, in the CRM to the next stage because it sounds good and gives you a bit of false hope. Slow down on the problem, their problem. Slow down on the magnitude of the problem. Slow down on the value you can provide. Slow down on who's involved and slow down on the next action in context of the buyer. Okay. If you slow down on this stuff, the deal will actually get some traction and speed up. Okay. Actually would be interesting. So just quickly in the chat, put in, are you a category like a category, I'll say category creator, or not, right? Can you just put that into the chat so we can get a sense here of because I just want to make an observation.
Lots of category creators coming through.
Okay, so
Interesting.
when your thing is hard to place, and we've kind of said this before, when you need to communicate that you solve a problem in a different or unique way, right? That maybe hard to explain, that there's even more of a pull to talk about your stuff and to demo quickly to your stuff. And there's a pull anyway, right, to talk about your stuff because that's the safe place instead of talking about them, their world, their business, their KPIs, all that kind of stuff. So you've just got to be, I suppose this is my observation, very, very careful about not getting distracted because you need to explain how your stuff solves the problem in a unique way. Okay. Any other observations here from anybody on the call?
Yeah, sorry, there's a couple of questions here. So one is, can you elaborate on what you mean by stakeholder path?
Yeah, just the people that need to be involved in the deal. So technically, you will have a champion that's advocating for your solution. You need to know who can veto the deal. So that's the economic buyer. You might have somebody that's technical. That might need to do some technical due diligence. There's various stakeholders that are involved that you need to get a consensus decision at the end. So that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in quickly on that? And I think it's worth, particularly when it comes to finding, are we talking to the right people? A very common response to, is there anyone else that needs to be involved in the decision is no, no, I can make it. But try and broaden that out so you can actually triangulate some of those responses as well.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily a first meeting conversation. Very rarely it can be. You have to have the credibility to ask that question. But talking about what is the process on your end so that we can adapt our sales process to you. And when you investigate that sort of buying process on the customer side or the prospect side, you start to figure out what stakeholders need to be involved. And that's kind of related to Alessandro's question about how do you know you have the right person. Um, I think it's a complicated question actually, but the simple answer is, does the person you're talking to have the problem that you can solve? If he or she doesn't have that problem, or it's not strong enough, it's not a priority for them, then maybe you need their guidance to find someone else in the organization that does have the problem. Or does your prospect organization have the problem? Because if they don't have the problem, there's nothing to sell. So I think it's really down to does this person have responsibility for fixing the problem, or does the person have personal emotional pain that you can solve?
Yeah.
Sorry, just on this topic, there's one quite relevant question, I think, which we just sort of just discussed briefly, but quite briefly. If the client asks for pricing early,
Yeah.
would you still try and slow it down?
I'll answer this. So you should
So I
give
don't
a.
think look, let me just because actually Charles and I had this exact discussion with a client a month or two ago. It's not about trying to slow it down. If they ask for pricing, say, well, we can't price it until we get some more information from yourselves, and that gives you the credibility to say, hang on, we're going too fast. I need some more information about what you're going to do with the product, or I need more information about the scope of the implementation, whatever it is. And that gives you that time to build the relationship. Because probably the number two thing we hear is, I gave pricing and they ghosted me. And it happens all the time. And that's one of the reasons is it's very easy to ghost somebody that you only talk to once. If you've had two, three, or four meetings, both sides are building rapport, there's skin in the game, they've invested time, you're less likely to get ghosted. Sorry.
I think I'd probably add to that as well. I think I'd add to that as well that I, Shamas has asked that question there, and he's also asked an earlier question, which is, does the need what we were talking about previously still apply if the offer involves some sort of free trial or initial diagnostic to demonstrate value? So again, I think if you're trying those two questions together would suggest, Shamas, that you do need to probably delay out because that trial is what's going to justify that value. If you're in a slightly different model where you've got freemium software or where you have a free option plus pricing on your website, then maybe you do need to get to that early. But what you've also got to do is make sure that your pre-prep in that meeting is strong enough that you really understand how that pricing matches your competitors and or the value that you're positioning in the business. So I think there's two slightly differences, but I'd say probably what Douglas has said is absolutely right based upon your first question.
Okay, let's move on. So what the first meeting should create. So setting up the first meeting properly, the right preparation, the right content, as Douglas said, creates this echo chamber. It creates this relationship, and it creates credibility, and it does shorten the sales cycle. So makes that deal predictable, more forecastable. The relationship has to be earned. Okay. for them to explore the issue, right? So you need to earn the right. You need to be credible enough, which means you need to have enough knowledge about their business and your problem domain and how you think you can help them specifically. Okay. You also need clarity on the right, I think it's the right direction of travel. So the direction of travel isn't to get to demo, proposal, pricing, all that kind of stuff. The direction of travel is whatever the whatever the buying process is. Okay. Um, and finally, potentially most importantly, it's all important, but you need the right, you need to anchor to enough value to warrant what the next step is. Okay. I know this is quite, this is quite theoretical, but we'll bring it to life on this next slide. So practically, and to Alessandro's point about, framing things, there are three areas you need to frame. Okay. And which will give you everything that was on the previous slides. So you need to frame your point of view before, but also on the call about how you can help their business specifically. So what's your hypothesis about their business that you'll test on that call? Okay. You need to frame the problem as well. So you need to help them understand the magnitude and the cost, the risk, the seriousness, however much you want to get into it. And then also frame the next step in context of the buyer's process, right? So these three things are what you need to get good at. We know today, and I definitely am. So buyers are, we're all overloaded, right? Everybody is. It's coming out of everywhere. But you now have to help them, I suppose, organize and prioritize themselves a little bit more than you used to do, and help them build confidence in their own decision. So this is a fairly recent thing that, well, the past 18, 24 months, this is a very good way to focus, and it will, selling is about helping, but helping them make the decision, right? And giving them confidence to make that decision versus, confidence as you as a vendor. That's important, but confidence in the decision to choose you is even now more important. Okay.
Sorry, there's
So
one more question, Charles, from
yeah.
Alfonso, which is probably pertinent to where we are. When there was genuine interest after two long calls demos with a few stakeholders, but they're not replying to you to your four follow-up emails, when do you stop, or do you have another suggestion?
I mean, I think the phrase is active nurture, but yeah, Douglas, I'll defer to you for this one.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, to take your sort of second part of this question first, what do you do? It's it's almost too late. I mean, there's a few techniques you can use to try to get back in the room, but it is almost too late. I think one of the things, like I said, if you don't have the relationship, so you had two calls, two demos, we'd have to go deeper into it, but I suspect you were selling them, which is, understandable. You're selling them, I've got a product, it's terrific. Let me demo it. It's wonderful. It's got features no one else has. And hopefully it also it solves a problem. They still see you as a salesperson. So if you say, hey, can we just get on a call so I can get a check of where you are? They know they're going to be sold to. So, and this is kind of goes back to this frame making, the first step point of view. If you come into a call and say, I have a point of view about your business, and obviously you don't use those exact words, but you're having a business discussion with them. Now, if you're selling to low-level developers, this may not work. But if you're selling to almost anybody else in an IT organization, in an operations organization, an HR organization, or whatever it is, they are interested in their business and you're able to get their attention by having business discussions. You're more than a salesperson. You're an advisor. You're a sounding board. So they feel kind of a responsibility maybe to respond to you, but more importantly than that, they feel that if they get on a call with you or meet you for a coffee, they're going to get some good ideas and content out of that. In addition to, of course, you're going to talk about your product solution, et cetera, and sell. So I think again, this is your question is brilliant because you're saying we've done this, now we're here, What do we do now? Well, actually, you needed to probably do it a little different. And I suspect, I'm just reading between the lines, at the beginning.
So can I just jump in here? So, this is probably exactly, it's happened to all of us. I know it's certainly happened to me. And absolutely agree with Douglas. You have to look at yourself and say, did I put forward a good hypothesis? Did I build value? Did I build relationship, etc.? However, this stuff happens. And there's a sort of couple of techniques that you can use that I think Douglas alluded to. The first one is asking them the question. I said another question. Look, this seems to have dropped down in your priority list. If that's the case, please let me know, etc. Or the other one, actually, I'm feeling I've not done a good job here building the value. I think we might have missed a few things. Sorry, you can be much more eloquent than me, I'm sure. But can we get back on track so I can actually have that? I've not done a good enough job.
Yeah, so that owning the fact that that maybe I wasn't clear enough or whatever. So owning that is a great way to do it. Also, and we could do a whole session on this, thinking about if they talked about their future state, their goals, how are the goals doing, right? Not talking about your stuff, talking about their business. Yeah.
Yeah, Alessandro just came up with a great point. Is it possible that they were with the wrong person? Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, I've even seen sales cycles where the first 3 to 5 months you were doing demos, having value meetings, and then you realize we're in the wrong part of the organization. Actually, we need to shift gears, and that's a little bit of the art that you learn along the way to identify as early as possible. Who has the pain and who has the buying authority combined.
Yeah.
Can
Okay.
can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify, and I don't want to monopolize the conversation, right? It was the right person. It was a family office. My background is in private equity family office. I know the problem exactly. I had one call with the family, the guy from the family, the second call with 3 managers. They all liked it. It's a software for FP&A and financial reporting. They all liked it. They agreed to do the free demo. They asked for a quote and they went silent after the quote. So it might have been the pricing, but all the value proposition, all the understanding them because it's my background, right? So,
yeah. I mean, so the question there is value proposition. That's great. What was in the proposal? What could you make or save them? What problem are you solving? How much was that quantified against price? What did that look like? So
it's yes. Is that a question to me or like a
yeah, I mean
hypothetical?
the observation is you do a demo, you do price, and then they go quiet. So the question is you weren't in control. Well, the observation is you weren't in control of that part of the process, and how much was it? How much value could they see against price, right? So that's one, and then you didn't control the process to get the next logical step. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I'm agreeing with you. It's prior pricing, and the point is that people are being spoiled with pricing from some AI tools and some other softwares, right? But what can you do if that's the market?
Well, that also differentiates you. If you say, look, I'm not happy to give you the pricing yet until I know a little bit more about your application and your business. And that shows that you're serious about this. You're not just a drive-by.
I've got a real live example of that, Alfonso. I mean, we sell a lead generation service, which is AI, cadence, and automation based with people. Okay, so that's how we differentiate, is we give dedicated resources who do calling on the back of it. But I am competing with AI SDRs effectively all the time. The most important thing I need to do at the beginning, and my sales team here, my internal sales team need to do, is understand their competition and where that person is playing at the very beginning of that first call, because that's going to define whether it's even worth me doing the 2 long demos afterwards or not. Because if they want to have a look, lots of people want to look at Ferraris, but there aren't that many people who can afford them. So I mean, you've got to get that balance right early, I think, in terms of that qualification.
Yeah, so that's like custom qualification or custom questions in context of the commercial environment that you're operating in.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got 2 minutes for the whole thing, but we've got a little bit more content than that, so we're going to go over if that's all right. So okay, so these three very distinct places that you need to get good at, right? Um, so practically, if we just break it down, so these are the five ingredients. Okay, so you've had the three areas, but these are specifically the five ingredients that are gonna create momentum on this first call. So the point of view, right? You'll have heard us talk about this a lot, but the point of view shows that you understand their business. It's not a pitch, so it's a hypothesis, right? So the shape of that, and this is what you research and you test on the call. This is the way to start the call. So it looks like this. So the reason I want to talk to you because I'm really interested in your business because I've seen this or I've seen that, and I think we could do this. Or I think you could do this or you could do that. To be a little bit more blunt about it, my point of view is I bet you've got this problem, or my point of view is your business should change in this way. So this is the point where you need to kind of challenge the buyer's thinking, not aggressively, but usefully. So challenge the person about their business process, about this, what they're currently doing and how they're currently doing things. It obviously depends on who you're speaking to, so you're not going to challenge every single person in the same way. So the level of business kind of challenge has to match, obviously who's on the call. But that's really the first meeting starting point. So you're not starting from a blank page. You're showing that you buy that you've done some work and there might be something worth exploring. And I'm certainly, we've all been buyers, right? We all are buyers, and it makes the call or even the email, that it really hits home if they know something really specific and really relevant about your business. You get it literally just cuts through the filter, right? So that's what you need with a point of view. Obviously, this is all, fairly high level. Douglas, maybe could you give us an example of a point of view?
Yeah, I can. And just while you were talking, I was thinking, there's probably no better time than right now, uh, historically, to build point of views, because there's a couple of really important things that every business on the planet is thinking about. And one of them is AI. So having a point of view, whether it's directly related to what you're selling or not, better if it is, but it doesn't have to be. I have a point of view that AI is going to change the game in your industry in this way, and this way. And then eventually you can weave your solution on the back of that, maybe, but it just shows you're thinking about their business and be very specific, right? So we did one not related to AI. A couple of years ago, Arnold Clark, the large car dealer network in the UK, we got a meeting with the CTO, again, high level person, even though technical, interested in the business, right? They sit on the board, they look at business results, they understand the CEO really isn't that interested in technology, that he's interested in selling cars. Well, we knew that they wanted to sell, I think it was 9 million more cars. And our point of view was we can help you sell 1 million more cars in the next 3 years, by the end of the next 3 years, 1 million more per annum. And the CTO giggled and said, "How are you going to do that?" I said, "Well, we're glad you asked." And we had great detail about where they had flaws in their customer journey and how we could augment this, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a long story, but it got us the credibility and it kicked off this echo chamber of, if these guys can help us sell 1 million more cars, they can help make our website more secure, and 1 million more cars means X amount of revenue per year, right?
Yeah.
X amount of margin per year. And everyone we spoke to in the sales process, this message got stronger, more refined, and actually a little bit bigger. And we ended up, taking what was normally a 9 month sales cycle, and we did it in 6 months, because every month they delayed, they were missing out on selling additional cars and adopting this new customer journey for their customers. So there's just a quick example of a point of view.
Yeah, and that US company I was talking about earlier, so this point of view exists at the lower levels as well, because it might be that you're dealing with the business owner or someone, very high in the organization, even if you're selling an SMB solution, right? Because or selling to an SMB, because it means a lot to them. So you need a commercial point of view for you know for the SMB side of things as well, not just enterprise. Okay, so the next component or ingredient is you know, mutual agreement on that point of view. So that doesn't mean that the buyer has to agree with what your point of view is when you went into the meeting. If they do, that's great. That says, you know, you've done some really good research, and it, you know, sets the anchor for the rest of the sales cycle. If it's wrong, they're going to correct you, because if someone says something about you and it's wrong, for example, you'll correct them. It's an instinct, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're right or you're wrong. You know, they will. You know, the outcome's the same. You're starting that conversation or getting agreement on a point of view that's obviously specific to an area within the business where you can help. The third component here is starting the problem statement. So you're extending the point of view when it starts to become commercial reality. So, you know, you don't need to diagnose everything in kind of meeting one or quantify it, to use a bad kind of sales phrase. But what you need to do is start to work up what the shape and size of the problem is. And, you know, it's called, you know, a problem statement that you might email over to them to ensure you correct and you captured everything for example. The kind of effect that you want them to, or what you want them to think about when you've had this meeting is, you know, that meeting I had with Linda was really interesting. You know, I don't know if I'm going to buy from her, but she really, you know, really stimulated some thinking and around my process or how I install things or what I'm going to do with AI or, you know, or whatever it is that's specific to whatever it is that's specific to that prospect. So it's this kind of starting up of the problem statement, and then, you know, exploring it on the next call that really gives, you know, some impetus for that next meeting. The fourth point, I'm just checking time. The fourth point is that initial value discussion. So, you know, the point of view also sets the value. You clearly don't need to go into an ROI model in the first meeting, but you need to start to have a value conversation before you get to demo, before you get to price or proposal, as we said a couple of times here. You know, useful questions are, as you start to what we call quantify the problem, is, you know, if I can fix this, how much do you think it would save your business, for example, if you were talking about saving, how much do you think it can accelerate your AI adoption or you know, or whatever it is. You should absolutely be relevant to answer the question or provide some ballparks, because the prospect might not know the answer to the question. So, you know, based on our experience, we could save, you know, typically we save X and Y, or we've seen, you know, whatever you've seen. So you need to be able to have a robust conversation about value and the areas where you're providing value, both from a problem perspective, but also a gain perspective. Okay. Final piece is obviously you need the right people and a diarised next step. Okay, so, you know, once you've done your value discussion, it's not just, okay, can we book another call? It's like, who in your organization, you know, can talk about this problem, or has got more details about this problem. You know, I think getting someone else in on the next call, or getting your prospect to recommend some names, you're going to have some very good rapport. You're going to have definitely you know, hit home, so to speak, with that call for them to bring somebody else in. I think you can clearly do your research before the call happens to understand a little bit about the titles and who's who, and it might be that you want to get to that person's boss, so you might want to give them, you know, typically when we work with organizations and we're solving this type of problem, it might be the head of insert title or the director of insert title. Do you think they would be relevant? Okay. So you want to kind of seed them and give them the option to say, oh yeah, you know, that's Bob and the operations director, and he should be coming into the next call. Laurie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just one very, very sort of quick point. For me, this is the litmus test. So if I have done these things correctly and I've built some rapport and I've come up with a view that is potentially of interest, there is absolutely no reason why someone would not want to have a next meeting with me. If I'm struggling, something has probably gone wrong over one of those phases.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree with that. So ideally, you're identifying who the right people are. Ideally, they're coming into your next call, but that might take a little bit longer. But critically, say this a lot, you have to get that call, whatever that call looks like, scheduled on your current call. So that's what turns the interest to a certain extent into a small buyer action. So the test is, did the first meeting, create a point of view, agreement on that point of view? Have you started to create a problem statement? Did you get some initial did you get the initial value anchor, and have you got the right people, right next people in that call in the diary? So there's a lot here, but maybe it takes a couple of calls to do all of this, but these are absolutely the things that you need to properly start the sales cycle. And if you haven't got this stuff, it's very likely that cycle isn't genuine and won't start. Okay. So just aware of time. So I'll quickly whiz through this. So we talk about a point of view, and we can certainly go into more detail on this. But the point of view evolves as you go through the meeting. Obviously, it starts with, we think we can help you, because we've seen this pattern in organizations similar to you, for example. So before the meeting, you do some research, you sharpen your hypothesis. Then in the first meeting, you test it. The buyer confirms it. Then you've got some form of anchor, or some form of foundation to build the sales process on. If they challenge it, as we said, you reset whatever that anchor is. Then as you go through all of the meetings, and this is what creates momentum, you are talking about that point of view, and it starts to become, more specific. It goes from, we think, this might be happening in your organization. So this is happening, it affects these people, it costs this much, and this is what needs to happen next. So it becomes commercially useful then, and it becomes the anchor for your business case, your proposal, and whatever is coming next in that buying and selling process. And as people come in, they might have different views on whatever the point of view is, but the point is you repeat it every time. Okay, so this is what creates momentum in this echo chamber that Douglas was talking through. Okay. Oh, I don't know what was on that slide. So all of this is noise, right? So everybody wants to get as much as they can out of the meeting. They want to quantify the problem, and they want to get, directly to the economic buyer. They want success metrics and all of that stuff. Great to have, but you don't need it. Okay, so if you're looking at this slide, don't ignore the stuff. If you get it, give yourself a gold star, but you don't need it. It's noise. You need the stuff that was on the previous slide for the sales cycle to start. Okay. Okay. So net, three things that you need. You need value agreed and communicated. Need to know who the right people are that need to be involved in that deal, and you need a diarised, a calendarized next step that is aligned with where the buyer's at. Okay, so if you have this, then you've done a good job, and that first meeting has set up the rest of the sales cycle. Okay, so we've got 3 minutes. We can probably go over it a little bit longer. But has anybody got any questions that they'd like to go through? I can't see the questions, by the way. But if they haven't,
No, there's no new questions.
No, there's no new questions. Oh, hang on. Oh, just a comment. Very nice. Thank you.
As
long as it was a good comment, that's all good. So if any of this is, feels familiar, a useful next step, we've actually earmarked some time, is to go through any of your own meetings, or any deals that have stalled in a more of a deeper way than we went through our Alfonso's. So we've kept Tuesday for what we've called one-to-one first meeting reviews. So if you wanted to bring an opportunity, you know, a call you've just had, bring in the transcript, or go through any question you've submitted today, then we've got time. Then we'll look at it against point of view, the agreement on the point of view, the problem, the value, the next step. So we'll give you a sense of, you know, what's missing and what to do next.
And you're going to send out the link with the calendar.
Yeah, I can do that. So let me just come off. Yeah, I can do that. Hold on 2 secs. I'll email over the link because I don't actually. Oh, stop share. There we go. Let me just put it in the chat.
Yes, Jeff, we will share the deck with you.
There we go. Let me just put that into the chat. So I'm just on the Zoom and it's not my favorite. There we go. Yeah, so Tuesday, if anybody wants to go through their specific question or any deals that they've got stuck. Okay, with that, thank you for your time. If there are no questions, expect an email, so I'll pop over the deck in the video.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
That was great.
Goodbye.
Really good.
Thank you. Good.